Hello, Dave and Tim here for the Single Malt Review. In today's dram, it's a name we hear often but we don't often try.
Yes, it's Glen Ord. And it's an Old Malt Cask Glen Ord. I don't think we've had an Old Malt Cask up in here for ages. It seems like I just haven't been buying them for whatever reason. We've sort of been on the Signatory and Cadenheads track recently, but who knows why. Regional availability, maybe. But, no, Old Malt Cask, Hunter Lang, not Douglas Lang. Hunter Lang kept the brands, Douglas Lang kept the name. Very, very confusing if you ask me, but never mind. And a Glen Ord 12-year-old. Very, very different from the last few whiskies we've tried, which have been sort of big, bombastic, and Isla whiskies.
Yes.
This one is, I'd probably describe it, without trying to sound down on it, as an everyday whiskey. It's a very, and I think pleasingly, normal dram. And I'll try to sort of illuminate on exactly what that means and why that's perfectly enjoyable as we taste it. But first, a few Glen Ord facts. It's a big distillery, quite an old distillery. First got its license in 1838, I believe, or somewhere around that time. And it's a Diageo-owned distillery, so you probably look for most of Glen Ord, and by most I mean at least 80%, if not 90%, in Diageo's brands. So probably most of it gets tipped into Johnny Walker. So you probably drink an awful lot of Glen Ord without even knowing it.
Which is why we relatively rarely see an actual Glen Ord.
It's had a bit of a spotty history. It has had its own releases. There was a Glen Ord range, a very long time ago now. That stopped, and then there was the Singleton range, which is a very, very confusing range of whiskey, which Diageo puts out now and then. There's the Singleton of Glen Ord, there's the Singleton of Dufftown, and then there's the Singleton of, I think, something else. And I think it was really only in Asian markets that the Singleton of Glen Ord appeared, but now I think even that has been discontinued. So it remains a very, very hard whiskey, like many of these blend-only jobbies, to find in its pure form. But single bottlings, independent bottlings, I should say, once again the saviour of all things niche, we've got one here, and I think it's fairly representative of what Glen Ord makes. In this case, it's a second fill bourbon hogshead, which the bottle has very concisely, which is one thing I can say in favour of Old Malt Cask bottles. They've got everything you need to know right there on the front of the label, and so we can tell you exactly where it's been. So, enough about that. Let's dig in and see what the whiskey's actually like.
A very pale hue, as you expect from refill bourbon, especially from a larger cask like a hogshead, made by breaking down regular bourbon barrels and reassembling them in a bigger form, if I am remembering correctly.
Yes, indeed. I'm not sure quite what the ratio is. I think you get about 2 hogsheads for every 3 barrels or something like that. Fascinating tradition, kind of dying out now, which is a shame because hogsheads, many people will claim, can produce some of the most interesting whiskey. They have some of the best ratio of whiskey to wood.
In this case, anyway. 337 bottles from the one cask.
So that wasn't a leaker, that one. That one held on to its whiskey. Because that's about as maximum you can get out of it.
So it's light on colour, but big on the aroma. That's full of rich vanilla fudge.
Huge vanilla. There's vanilla. There's coconut. It's quite a bourbon matured ensemble, really. There's the things you'd normally expect. Absolutely, almonds. That's a good pick. But what this really, really brings is huge amounts of spirit. What this is sort of the reason I got it, really. It's a very, very spirit-driven whiskey, as you're always going to get from a youthful 12-year-old. It's not totally young, but it's certainly not ancient. 12-year-old, second fill, there's not going to be too much wood influence. There's going to be a lot of that spirit character. You really be able to dig into what the distillery produces intrinsically. And this one, I think you really can. First off, there's just a lot of spirit, full stop. There's a lot of sort of sweet acetone. There's quite a prickle on there. It's quite a keen, vibrant spirit.
That's where Old Malt Cask's default 50% ABV bottling strength helps too. It really lets some of the inherent characters
I suppose it does. I mean, I don't think there'd be anything wrong with wrong with whatever the natural strength of this would have been. I don't think it would have been much higher than 50, but yeah, it's always been a bit of a quirk of Old Malt Cask. I suppose saves them a bit of money here and there, except for when they end up with a cask that is in fact underneath 50%, in which case they just have to hope nobody notices.
No, it's good as opposed to the more mainstream 46 or 43%.
Certainly, yeah.
Get a little more of a whiskey's natural essence.
If you're not going to get single cask strength, then I suppose 50% isn't too bad.
Yeah.
We won't complain at any rate. So where was I on this one? It's where this really comes apart from any other youthful, strong, spirit-driven whiskey is in some of the more underlying notes here. I get quite a lot of paraffin candle wax. Not a really sort of distinct beeswax like a Klein Leash, which is always considered to be one of the sort of hallmark waxy whiskies. This is much more of it's more of a refined wax. I keep going back to sort of warm paraffin. No peat to speak of. Probably nothing whatsoever in here. It's not that kind of distillery. But ultimately quite simple on the nose. It's not trying to be anything huge. You've got to remember this is a whiskey that has been made to blend. It's made to go not unnoticed, but it's made to be part of a much larger group that has to sing in no small amount of unison to produce a blend like, say, Johnny Walker Red or Black or anything, where there could be upwards of 30 malt whiskies in addition to the grain. So they have to keep their heads down, or it'll all go wrong, really. And that's how these are put together, and it's best to keep that in mind. So on the palate at full strength.
Ooh. There is a startling intensity there. The higher strength means initial bite of alcohol, and there's sort of a young spirit flavour, almost like new make, lurking around the edges. But there's hints of leather, beeswax, honey.
There's certainly honey and beeswax. Leather, not so strong for me. There's huge quantities of almost ripe white fruit. There's slightly underripe banana. There's crisp green apple. There's a lot of Speyside flavours. And in fact, clearly I cut my research short because I didn't check
They are Highland.
where this one is. Highland. So there you go. A lot of Speyside characteristics coming through. But as we all know, the distinction between what's a Highland and what's a Speyside distillery is fairly arbitrary. This is certainly made in what you'd consider the Speyside style.
Yeah, it tastes like something much younger. I'm going to attribute that to the less active cask.
Certainly.
A lot of that spirit.
I think a very, very tight cask and a very non-interactive cask. It hasn't taken up too much wood character at all, as you can see from the colour. I think it probably does want a wee bit of water, as most 50% whiskies would.
That should bring it down a little. It has mellowed up the nose while also emphasising some of that acetone property. There we go.
Quite a
More
lot.
of that fruit. Lots of it.
Quite a lot sweeter and juicier now, which is something we see time and again. A whiskey which might be a little too buttoned up initially, you put a little bit of that water in, especially for a cask strength release, and suddenly there it all is. It just has difficulty really expressing itself with that much strength there.
For me now, this is dominated by apples, pears, and a splash of white rum.
I think I can see where you're coming from with the white rum.
Yeah.
Not a hugely pungent white rum, sort of a crisper sort of a thing. Maybe think more Mount Gay than Bacardi necessarily.
There's a little prickle of maybe aniseed, black pepper, a few exotic spices on the end.
I think black and white pepper as well. It is still quite a hot whiskey on the tongue. And in the throat. Very, very fiery. It has not, for 12 years old, as you say, you could be fooled into thinking it was younger. It's a very, very youthful whiskey. It's one which would age very, very long and very, very slow if it was let to. And that really is all it does. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't try to do anything there's no heroics going on here. This one it's a worker, and it's built for blending, and it's built to work alongside other malts and prop them up. It's not the signature, not the character, not the voice that's heard. It's just sort of part of the orchestra and the blends which it takes part in. And so you kind of have to not be underwhelmed by a whiskey like that. You have to keep all that in mind. You have to keep in mind where that whiskey is coming from. Otherwise you might drink it and go like, it's a bit whiskey flavoured, sort of a thing. You have to know and understand the nature of the whiskey. And then there's that on one end, and then there's, on the other end, these whiskies are usually extremely cheap. So I wouldn't want to say I got this purely because I'm some sort of whiskey whisperer, hipster person looking for underwhelming whiskies. I got this both because I do understand where these whiskies come from and can enjoy them, also because it was massively affordable and I wanted a good, strong whiskey. And its character as a blender, that actually has another use. If I want a whiskey that's just a little bit different, this one you can perfectly easily make your own blends with. If I wanted a nice peaty dram, but I didn't want to use up all my Bowmore, say, add a little Bowmore to this, and you've got quite a peaty whiskey with a really, really good backbone. It's a whiskey that will work with anything. And so it's a good one for mixing and matching and making a dram to suit your own tastes, which you can do quite easily if you've got a small sort of library of whiskies there. Some people would think that might be a little bit sacrilegious, but give it a go. You might just find it's a bit compelling. But anyway, scores for this one. Nothing out of the park here, but I don't think it was ever going to be. It's an 86 from me. What do you think?
I'll go a little higher. This one rates a 90 from me. It is charming and deceptively expressive. From the light colour and the nature of the cask it's from, it's easy to be lulled into thinking that it's going to be maybe a little insipid, a bit light, and just not have much to say for itself, but it really does. Once again, an example of a bourbon cask maturation, which always finds new ways to surprise and beguile me. This one succeeds well.
Solid stuff, and I think very available if you seem particularly intrigued. Oh dear, I've just noticed there's a little bit of the microphone in the shot. I really hope the camera wasn't focusing on that one. Oh well, if it was an awful blurry video, then I'm to blame. Never mind. We will move on to something a little bit different very shortly. This has been Single Malt Review. Sludger.